We had three themes for this day. The first was, after 7 long and cruel years of freezing the minimum wage in British Columbia at $8 an hour and lowering the starting wage for new workers and for immigrant workers to $6 an hour, it's time this government started looking after everybody else and raised that immediately to $10 an hour and put it to the cost of living. And you know, it takes a certain kind of person, that would say to over 300,000 British Columbians earning less than $10 an hour to go stuff your wage increase, but to give himself and those closest to him wage increases of 30, 40, 50, and 60%. Our message to him is very clear. It's time that you killed those wage increases and brought them into line with the rest of British Columbia. And finally, they raised the price of gasoline massively, these corporations, in the last year and a half to 2 years. 45% increases, 40 cents a litre. Every day you pick up the paper, surprise, surprise, we have record profits. Funny, we're paying record prices at the pumps, and then they're getting record profits. Well, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. We're being robbed at the pump. Now, Gordon woke up one morning and said, how am I going to help people in British Columbia? How am I going to help them deal with a 40% increase? How am I going to help those truckers who are trying to make a living? How am I going to help the seniors trying to heat their houses? Well, I have a novel idea. I'm going to bring in a new tax and put it on them. You know what? It's wrong. It's got nothing to do with climate change. It won't solve the problem at all. So our message today is really straightforward. Get rid of the tax on human beings and workers and ordinary people and seniors in British Columbia who are trying to make ends meet with smaller and smaller checks, and put it where it belongs, on the corporations and their profits. That's where it belongs. That's where it belongs, because they're making all the money. And if they were doing solar power and investing in alternative energy and doing all those things, that might be different. But they're buying their own stock and giving dividends. They ain't helping us. So that should come back here to help people in British Columbia. Yeah. This isn't complicated. The reason it's not happening is because the people in Victoria don't care about us, and we have to send a message. The price of not caring about us is that you don't get your job to continue. You get diselected, as they say. It's time for that to happen. Time to get on those.
Of Students is BC's provincial students union, representing 150,000 university and college students across BC. We're here today because we see our struggle for accessible public education as the same struggle that Labour faces to uphold workers' rights. Quite simply, our struggle is against injustice. And our struggle is so much more important this coming year because we are struggling against a government that is unjust. It is a government that deals with injustice by denying it exists. It is a government that perpetrates injustice and denies it exists. And that is abundantly clear when it comes to BC's lowest paid workers. For nearly 8 years, Gordon Campbell has denied BC's lowest paid workers a raise. Even a raise that would have put a full-time minimum wage earner just slightly over the poverty line back in 2006. But Gordon Campbell hasn't stopped there. He's torn up public service contracts and privatized delivery of essential services. He's raised tuition fees so high that students from low and middle income backgrounds now have to take on mortgage-sized debt to get an education after high school. Thousands over the last 7 years have been forced to give up on their dreams and drop out of school or never enroll in the first place. It seems Mr. Campbell believes that making $8 an hour is such a good wage, he's willing to put as many people as possible on that wage. Of course, he also believes that $8 or 10 or even 40 isn't good enough for himself and his friends. While hundreds and thousands of British Columbians make poverty wages, he's lined his own pockets with a 53% pay increase. And he's lined the pockets of his corporate friends with billions in tax cuts. It's the mark of an arrogant and out-of-touch premier. But Gordon Campbell has made one critical mistake. He's planning to run on his record. He seems to think that British Columbians don't really want to afford an education. He seems to think that British Columbians don't mind record numbers of our children living in poverty. He seems to think that British Columbians believe it's fair that someone who rolls up their sleeves and goes to work every day for 8 hours should still live in poverty. Well, we know differently. We know that the vast majority of British Columbians believe in a fair minimum wage. We know that the vast majority of British Columbians believe in universal access to education. And we know that the vast majority of British Columbians believe that we should have a just province that treats everyone with dignity and respect. And we know that if Gordon Campbell doesn't get the message soon, he's going to find out that the vast majority of British Columbians believe his government has got to go.
So like a lot of working people, they're feeling the crunch. These are nurses who do a lot of work for us in the province. Join me in welcoming Debbie McPherson, the President of the Nurses Union of British Columbia. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk to you about the difference between policy and reality in the province of British Columbia. If the measure of a productive society, if what's needed is a healthy and educated population, why is it that this government puts in place policy and taxation which does everything it can to undermine those two basic tenets? Why is it that when you need health, the indicators for good health are housing, nutrition, activity, and education? And yet the policies of this government do nothing to support the achievement of justice and equality in those four areas. Looking at poverty wages that lead to underemployment or working poor people lining up in record numbers at our food banks trying to feed their families. Or student fees that are so high with such lack of support for public education that our population is having less and less enrollment in advanced education than ever before. Or what about a ministry that's created to promote activity, promote healthy eating, promote healthy living, even has its own minister of broccoli, as I call him, and then delivers to people wages where they can't afford to buy healthy food. Delivers to people a gas tax, which then increases the cost of delivering healthy food to the people of the province. What about a Ministry of Finance that every day says it has no money for health, no money for health at all, and yet its own taxation policies do everything it can to make our population increasingly unhealthy? What about a Ministry of Finance that finds a little extra cash for itself, and when it does, decides to give it out in playground grants? Playground grants that go to the richest, most advantaged populations in the province, instead of to the poorest communities where they're most desperately needed. Another sign of failed public policy. And what about access to health care? Health care for seniors, health care for people in our communities. Right now our government is doing everything it can to privatize long-term care for seniors, passing on the cost of care to those who can least afford it in the sunsets of their lives. And finally, there's the cost attached to working with the gas tax that we have now. Nurses particularly feel it, as do all other working people. It's not going to be those people who give to the Liberal Party, who drive Mercedes and Porsches and Beamers, who are going to park their frickin' cars. It's going to be the working poor, people who can't afford to drive their trucks, take their kids to school, and drive to work anymore. It's going to be our community nurses who subsidize healthcare in this province by driving their own cars and not being compensated for the increased cost of gas. This type of regressive taxation has to stop, and we need public policy that supports a healthy and well-educated population, and we're not getting it from this government.
Brother Dave Coles from the Communication, Energy and Paper Workers Union. Brother Coles.
Now, normally I would be up here explaining to you why I've been traveling back and forth across Canada dealing with the forest crisis. But today, because of the subject we're talking about, we're going to talk about Stephen Harper and the federal Liberals and their national energy strategy and program. It's quite a complicated, detailed program, so I'm going to read it to you. It's quite complicated. And it's 3 points. Point 1. Pump as much unprocessed tar sands oil to the United States in the shortest possible time. Point 2. Pump as much unprocessed tar sands oil to the United States in the shortest possible time. And then, of course, from the Liberals, pump as much unprocessed tar sands oil to the United States in the shortest possible time. Now, that may seem hilarious and outrageous, but it's factual. What Peter Lougheed forgot to tell everybody when he made that famous remark, "Let the East freeze in the dark," there is no pipelines from Western Canada to the refineries in Sarnia or in Montreal. Zero. Not one pipeline, not one, goes from Western Canada to the center of Canada. Where do they all go and where are they being built? They're being built to directly send oil, unprocessed bitumen, which is the tar sands, directly to the States and all the way to the Gulf Coast to process Canadian tar sands oil with no jobs. We get the pollution. If I was an Albertan, I'd be outraged. They get the pollution, the Americans get the jobs, and the boardrooms get the profits. Now, for years, our union has called for the renationalization of Petro-Canada. It's a novel concept. People of Canada own the resource. The people of Canada are getting screwed. Well, I'm telling you, we should now seriously look, saying our Prime Minister is about to put us in a position of an election that no one needs nor wants. Don't you think that as Canadian citizens, we should start to debate and talk about that maybe we should own the resources of this country? Yes. That Canadians should run and own those oil companies. 80% of the world's oil that's being found and processed now, 80%, this isn't just rhetoric from a goofy union leader, 80% of the world's oil being processed now is from companies that are owned by the citizens of those countries. And I think it's time we put the question to the Canadian citizens: who owns the resource and who should get the profits? Thank you.
Last but not least, Gudrun Langhoff is a member and a director of COSCO, the Council of Senior Citizens Organization of BC. They're activists all over the province. They do an amazing job for seniors. And we wanted to make sure that if Gordon Campbell forgot what was going on with seniors, we certainly didn't. Thank you very much.
I'm here on behalf of the Council of Seniors, about 80,000 of us all over the province. So, and we know that that this lineup this morning of speakers started with students, the young folks, and we seem to be ending it with the old farts. So here we are.
Not that old.
My job this morning is to remind you that with luck, you too will grow old and get to honor the people who are building and have built this country at many more Labor Day rallies. But luck isn't the only factor. Brothers and sisters, preparing for your retirement does not start and end with contributing to registered retirement savings plans. It doesn't, regardless of what banks tell you. Part of preparing for retirement is making sure that your community is healthy and age-friendly. Prepare now. You have to work now to make sure that social safety nets and public services are in place, that they're improved and stay public. Costco's members, and that's Costco, by the way, like the retailer without the T, and if you want to look it up on the internet, it's costcobc.ca. Costco's members all worked in one way or another to build BC and BC's economy. Some of us thought that when we retired we could spend our time pursuing leisure. You remember that leisure activities featured large a while back. Instead, we find ourselves in a time warp. We seem to be going backwards with this government. They insist on dismantling just about every public institution we hold dear. They privatize services and public resources, Medicare, BC Hydro, BC Rail, the list is endless. Our children and grandchildren are under attack. It starts with inadequate daycare. There just isn't enough good licensed daycare available for working families. After-school care is practically non-existent. Public schools are underfunded. Post-secondary tuition fees are unaffordable, and the students and families start to owe huge amounts of money. As I said, the list is endless, and most speakers ahead of me have already enumerated them, so I won't bore you. And chances are, you all know this stuff. That's why you're here. We seniors may be getting on in years, but for sure we weren't born yesterday. Like everyone else, seniors see the difference between what the government preaches through its private for-profit public relation campaigns, which, by the way, is paid for by us through our tax contributions, and there's a difference between what they preach and what they practice, very clearly. Increase the minimum wage now, Mr. Campbell. It's far more important than paying your top bureaucrats well. This morning, the minister claimed that there aren't any folks working at the training rate level. Well then, as Rick Clough said, what's the harm in raising the bottom rate then? Do it now.
Yeah. Rick Clough.
Some folks calculated that $16 an hour is closer to a living wage, so setting it at $10 is hardly jeopardizing the economy. We might even like the carbon tax if we saw the money actually going to eliminate the emissions. Until then, get rid of it. BC Hydro rates are increasingly at an alarming rate. Part of that is because they are getting ready for us to pay the big bill that the so-called green run-of-rivers privatization created. Let's stop further leases on our rivers right now and make sure that whatever we decide is in the best public interest. But today, all I want you to take away and remember from, the Costco speech is that without workers, nobody would make a profit anyway. And it's funny, but we pay for those profits, so the price is for goods and services. So it's a bizarre twist. Unionized workers' struggles in the past have brought us all kinds of benefits that are standard now, and I don't need to get into them, like the weekend and safety rules and all those kinds of things. We have to make sure that we keep working to continue work together, to make sure that we have a healthy retirement to look forward to. Pay attention to how your pension funds are being managed, and don't wait until you're a year or two away from your magic retirement date. Happy Labor Day, and see you at the picnic.